somewhere on that journey, it started to hit me that I had been making progress. It sort of dawned on me. It was like, wow, there is unfortunately a lot of suffering out there. Anxiety, or to a degree, is a product of not living in the present moment. I struggle with this stuff sometimes too. We have to deal with reality. Anxiety is friggin' hard. We think everybody is looking at us all the time. Society kind of tells men, suggests to men who they should or shouldn't be emotionally. I am a no BS person. Emotions are difficult for men. Period. Are you getting your psychological needs met? Are you looking to fulfill this need of feeling as though you are enough through the wrong ends? If I don't open up to them and say, look, I know I look like I'm doing well, but I'm not, how am I supposed to expect them to find it and help me?
How do we do to help people who are truly struggling to maybe not eliminate the pain, but to slowly start healing?
That's a hard question to answer. You want to try to get...
Welcome back to another episode. Today's guest is a blogger, an author, and a coach. This guy has helped hundreds of people to understand, manage, and overcome their anxiety. Without further ado, let's welcome the author of Get Out of Your Head, Brian Sachetta. How's it going, Brian? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Daniel. I'm doing well, and thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for being here, man. I've been very excited about this conversation when I heard about you, your work, and how you're helping people to overcome their anxiety based on your life experience. I felt, okay, this is somebody I want to talk about. I want to talk to, because not only me, I know people that have struggled and they don't know how to deal with, these things on a daily basis. Tell me a little bit about your background, your relationship with anxiety, and what led you to write the book, Get Out of Your Head.
Yep, happy to do that. So my background is probably a little unexpected for the field of work that I write in. I am a software developer by trade, so I have been a software developer for 12-ish years since I graduated college, and somewhere along that 12 years, right, I had been experiencing a lot of anxiety and depression myself, and it dated back previously to before that 12-year period. But somewhere on that journey, it started to hit me that I had been making progress with both of those conditions, and I had started to learn things. And I'm really not in any way trying to toot my own horn here. I'm just laying out the story. Is I had realized that I had improved my own life and my ability to cope with these things. And having talked to so many people in the space, and mostly, friends and family, and excuse me, I just hit something on my desk, people who had suffered with these same sorts of conditions, it sort of dawned on me. It was like, wow, there is unfortunately a lot of suffering out there. There's a lot of folks who struggle with these things, and my own struggles opened my eyes to that. And also, in having those conversations, people would kind of say to me like, wow, you've learned some stuff, you've implemented some tactics for yourself, and it feels like you've gotten somewhere. So what's your plan? Are you going to share that information with other people? Do you want to eventually be a therapist? And I guess long and short was, I didn't really know what the best route was, but I always have had a passion for helping other people and side hustles and running businesses and whatnot. And so I kind of sat down and said to myself, look, I have all this information that I have compiled for myself, and I like writing and I like helping other people. And so why don't we start by trying to cross an item off the bucket list, which was basically to write a book. And so fast forward to today, after having written that first book on anxiety, that basically kind of got me on the path to being somebody who just looks to serve an audience in the anxiety and depression, or in the mental health space, right? And so along the course of the next, let's say, 5 years or so, I started blogging, or I kept blogging. I wrote a second book about depression. I did some coaching. And so it's really me just trying to, as I mentioned, disseminate this information and help people in any way I can, because one, I feel like I feel confident in my approach, and I also just care a lot. I have been there before. I continue, there are days, right? We're all human. And so there's days where where I'm anxious, where I'm depressed, but those days are fewer and further between. And I guess where I'm going with that is basically just that, when I reconnect to that pain, it really strengthens my resolve and my mission to want to help people, just because I know I have that pain inside me, and I can connect to it in other people and say, wow, my job here, my mission here is to help.
I can relate to your story because, and I think that most people, and especially men, can relate to the story. Anxiety, I feel that it's never gonna go away anyway. It's always it is part of our, I don't know. It's like that help us evolve. That's help us to, kind of, if you dive into the evolutionary psychology and all of that, how that kept us alive and all of that. But nowadays we don't need. We're not we're not in danger as we were in the past. But here's the thing, right? There's I feel that a lot of people take anxiety as a bad thing, and in the majority of the time, it is, right? I just feel it is. But when you use your approach, when it comes to, okay, how do I control this? How do I manage this in a way that I'm not feeling bad about myself? Because here's the thing: everybody gives you an easy, simple things to do. Because at the end of the day, these exercises are very, very simple, but you don't see results right away. It takes time to build the whole thing, and as you said, slowly but surely you're going to get less and less anxious. What have you seen in your approach in your life and people that you have coached? What are those techniques that might sound too simple and yet they are very effective?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there and a lot to answer. Let me first kind of dive in by saying, if you want to quote unquote master any subject, it does take time, right? And that's not to make folks who are listening feel discouraged as if they can't, get a grip on their anxiety in some capacity quickly, because you definitely can. However, I think what you were referring to, right, where it's like if you just get a couple simple strategies, you may still find yourself falling into anxiety and then getting frustrated because you're like, oh, I thought I had the answers, right? So a lot of the work that I do it revolves around helping folks come up with an anxiety toolkit, is how I like to say it, and that involves basically coming up with different perspectives and different tactics on the high, medium, and low level. And what I mean by that is, so on the low level, right? That's basically saying when you are anxious, what is something that is actionable that you can do right now to mitigate some of that feeling, right? The high level is more, okay, what are the things that you can do in your life, generally speaking? What holistic lifestyle practices can you adhere to that will put you in fewer anxiety provoking scenarios or make you feel less anxious to begin with, or feel less anxiety overall, right? And then the medium is sort of in the middle there. And so, as an example, a quick example of a, I guess, like an implementation of that toolkit, right? So, you could maybe say, right, on the high level, I'm going to tell somebody that if they are into it and they are able to do it, maybe take up some sort of physical activity regimen, right? So start walking regularly, start lifting weights regularly, running, doing yoga. That's going to help put your mind and your body at ease more often. So that way you get to each day, like let's say if you're working out in the morning, then you get to work and you are calming your body down through that workout, right? I could go into the science behind that, but let's just work off of that premise for a second. And then, so if you're doing that in the morning, you're showing up to work each day a little bit more calm, in a better headspace, right? And then when you encounter certain triggers in your environment, those things might not necessarily send you into the rabbit hole, so to speak, right? So then, if we were to say something on the low level, just to keep things quick and easy here, we'll skip medium for now, but you kind of get the sense that this is a gradient, right? Where you're coming up with tactics that sometimes are really concrete and actionable, and others are more that high level. Oh, I'm meditating regularly and putting myself in a better state, So going back to the low level, or thinking about the low level, in my book, I talk about 10 different tactics that we can enact when we're feeling anxious to walk that fear back a little bit. I call it the 10 steps to getting out of your head. It's not rocket science. It's just, a list of tactics that I feel have worked for me. So something, if we pulled a random entry on that list, I'm just going to pick one right now and basically say, okay, step 7 is get back to the present moment. So a little bit of a backstory on this one, or just some information on this one, right? Is like, so you could almost say, that anxiety, or to a degree, let's say 50-75%, anxiety is a product of not living in the present moment, right? So if you think about what anxiety is, I often say that anxiety is future oriented fear, right? So if you are walking in the woods and a bear crosses your path, that is fear, right? You that feeling you're feeling that yeah, the feeling you're feeling right now, that is fear because that threat is in front of you. Anxiety is more feeling fear that you are going to encounter a bear in the woods 2 weeks from now, a month from now, a year from now, right? So it's sort of threats that are in your mind that aren't really, really in front of you at the moment. And so if you work off of that definition and you say, okay, step 7, get back to the present moment, what we're trying to do is remind ourselves that going to those places in our minds and thinking about the proverbial bears in our heads is only perpetuating our anxiety. Now, the caveat here, obviously, is that there are times when in this very moment we are horribly afraid, right? And so that's a nuance that is difficult. If you're experiencing a panic attack right now, you're like, I am in that panic attack right now. Like, don't tell me to get back to the present moment, right? But the overarching theme is the less often that you go to those places in your mind and think about things in the future, the less anxiety you will experience. So that's kind of the high level approach there.
See, I definitely understand, and I definitely um, see that. I thought honestly that close to 100% of the anxiety came from living in the future, because I've been somebody who has suffered from anxiety most of my life, and this is not the interesting thing about my case is in many cases I could just be driving to a grocery store. I could be just minding my own business. I'm not thinking about anything. And when I'm in those times, in those months where I have like a high level of anxiety, I just feel the pressure on my chest. I don't freak out. I don't panic because I'm used to it. It is it is annoying. It is unpleasant. It bothers me, but it's not something that okay, here we go again. I learn how to accept it. But one thing I learned about myself, and I think that a lot of people could relate to this, is just I constantly live in the future. It's not that I'm worried, I'm panicking, like, oh, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, or we have this, or whatever. It's just thinking about the things I need to do in the future. And it's funny because everyone have told me you need to stay more in the present, live in the present moment, and making that switch of okay, I'm going to stop worrying about what's going to happen, where I want to be, or where I need to be in a month from now, in a year from now, and focus on the next 24 hours. Having said that, because I feel that the anxiety comes from a lack of control, lack of when you don't, when you have lack of certainty in to some degree. How, and I know that it's a muscle that you build over time with practice, as you say, mastery takes, I mean, it takes time. People talk about the 10,000 hours. We're not saying that it takes you 10,000 hours to become better, but you need to practice this. How do you stay present? Because I feel that at least for myself, is one of those things that is easier said than done. Because even if you try to stay in the present, your mind is already racing and looking ahead of you.
For sure. And I'm glad that you brought that question up because so much of the work that I do revolves around uncovering or admitting these difficulties, right? I'm not some I am I try to pride myself on being somebody who always answers these questions and isn't like, oh, like superfluous or like anxiety this, anxiety that, life's great, everything's amazing, right? We have to deal with reality. Anxiety is friggin' hard. There is no doubt about it. Your mind, my mind, everybody's mind is wired in certain ways that makes you do certain things, right? And so when you said, how do you stay present? It's really hard. It absolutely is. I think one of the reasons why I come back to the notion of a toolkit, right, is because you want to make things as simple as you can. It's sort of the same concept of like, okay, so if you are thirsty, without even needing to think about where do I go get water and is the water clean and whatever, just have a bottle of water around or a cup of water around. And then that way, as soon as you have that feeling, you just grab it and you start drinking, right? So when it comes to staying present, I guess we all need to come up with various solutions for ourselves, but I will absolutely give you some ones, right? So an example might be, okay, you come home, you're feeling anxious. I'm, you're saying to yourself, I'm thinking about that scary conversation with my boss next week or that sales presentation I have to give, whatever it is, right? Maybe you sit down and you say, look, there's a book that I really want to read. maybe it has nothing to do with anxiety, self-help, anything like that. Maybe it's a fiction book. Maybe it's, I like reading Harry Potter, so that's a shameless plug there or whatever. But maybe it's like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to throw myself into a task, into an activity that has nothing to do with the future, right? I'm going to be present with this book. Maybe you like painting, and so you say, or drawing, right? Because sketching is a little bit more accessible. You don't necessarily need paint supplies and all that. So you could say, look, I'm feeling a little anxious right now. I'm at a coffee shop. Bang, pull out the notebook, start sketching. So the idea is to come up with things like that. Maybe it is listening to your favorite song. Maybe it's going for a walk. It is basically the idea, right? Is our subconscious minds are so powerful and we are trying to override them a bit. And the more that we can hammer these tactics into our minds, the more they'll become something of second nature. And then when we feel that feeling can then, the feeling being anxiety, we could maybe make it so that that becomes a trigger for us to then go do the presence inducing activities that we have already identified for ourselves.
When you mentioned about doing the whole, if you're thirsty and you put a bottle of water next to you, it reminded me a lot to the book Atomic Habits, James Clear, where, well, if you can apply those principles to anxiety, having the right things around you now, the problem with that is a lot of those triggers or a lot of these easy things that we can apply to ourselves, we actually have to think about it. And more times I know when we're anxious, that's the least, I mean, that's the last thing we think about. But what you're saying, doing something, an activity that gives you some sort of freedom, that gives you that peace of mind. And I'll be honest with you, I can read, I can watch TV, I can do those things. For some reason, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, for some reason, every time I do those activities, I still think about, it's hard for me to even focus. I'm thinking about the problems that I don't even have yet, the problems that might face ahead. And the only thing that I can quiet that thing is to numb myself by scrolling down on social media. I hate it. I try to, and especially I feel it more when I put a blocker. So I'm not allowed because I waste a lot of time there. But I've tried a few things and maybe I need to do it more often. But every time that I sit to read a book, I feel shit. I'm not being productive. I need to get back into hustle. And it's that thing that I created like a toxic relationship with me and doing anything outside work. And I feel that, I don't know in other country, but it feels like in America it is a lot like that. Everyone is just trying to push and ignore any kind of breaks, any kind of anxiety, or any kind of hobbies. What have you seen so far um, in that particular aspect with people suffering from anxiety and having that push, either mindset or behavior?
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate your candor here. It's not easy to admit some of these things, right? And I'm right there with you. I struggle with this stuff sometimes too. And my answer is kind of many parts once again. The first part being that if you come home and you are reading and that is not working for you, then you have not found the answer, right? And I am a no BS person. So, I don't come up here and be like, well, you got to try harder. You got to read more. You got to find a different book. Like, no, if it's not working, it's not working. What came to mind when you talked about productivity and sort of this incessant drive for it, what comes to mind is in my head is it feels as though there is something deeper in you that hasn't maybe been addressed. And I'm not trying to make some grandiose statement. I'm just saying that it's almost like if you were to sit down and say, okay, I feel as though I need to keep driving forward. I need to be productive. I need to do all these things. Otherwise, I feel this way. Otherwise, this might happen. My question to you, maybe my challenge for you would be to ask yourself to sit down, right? Maybe with a journal, maybe not, just in silence and say, okay, feelings, okay, thoughts and scary ideas and whatnot. What are you trying to tell me? And if it's nothing, we'll move on. But like, why are you running these patterns? Are you afraid that you're going to lose your job and end up on the street? Kind of run the scenario in your head to say, what is the worst that could happen, and then get to maybe that piece, or say, what am I ignoring, right? Because to answer the other part of your question, the mind is so complex, and the conscious mind really tries to work in, I guess what I would say is it is there to help us survive, even though the whole brain helps us survive as well, right? And what I mean by that is if there's problems in our lives and whatnot, like our brains just try to keep us, they try to put us in a position where we keep charging forward and we don't necessarily address what it is that's going on until it becomes a serious problem. And this is why sometimes, right, you will look back or you'll talk to somebody and they'll be like, I woke up one day and I realized that like me and my partner, it just wasn't working out. And it's like, it's not like that person woke up and all of a sudden the relationship was bad that day. It's that the conscious mind is trying to be like, nope, I know my partner just did this, but I'm going to forget about that. And I need to ignore that and repress that. And then one day they're like, I can't repress all this stuff anymore. Boom, there it is. So that would be my question for you is like, is there some is there some inner insecurity or fear that is driving, is forcing you to try to be productive in order to avoid certain outcomes? Because let's face it, right? If you're sitting down and you're trying to read and that's not working, that reading is a relatively surface level implementation or tactic, right? So sometimes we need to get a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Couple of things. When you mentioned the conscious mind of how relationships fall apart and all of that, well, that is exactly the same as you described it. How my marriage fell apart a couple of years ago. It hit me. Now I tried to fix it. I tried to think, but I think it was already too late. But it's all about that. You're pushing things on the side. You feel that you can, in a vacuum, each thing seems insignificant, and they are. The accumulation of it is what actually drives the whole thing. And for the other question or for the question you had, I've been reflecting a lot and also going to therapy, and I feel it's the ongoing feeling of not being enough, and I need to perform in order to be accepted, in order to fit in. But it's not that I'm trying to accomplish this to show off to people, but to feel like I got somewhere. And whenever I reach a milestone, I feel like no, still not enough. I need to, and it's that whether I'm training for races or building a business, I feel that if I rest, I'm not gonna make it.
So this is so fascinating, and I'm so glad that you're willing to have this volley with me. Where I go next, right, is so you were kind of saying you accomplish these things and you want to accomplish them to feel as though you are enough, right? But that feeling of being enough, that is your determination, right? Even though there are societal pressures and forces and we want to fit in with our friends and peer groups and there are some benchmarks. At the end of the day, you are the one who makes that determination, right? And that is one of the, I think, the most liberating things that you can come to conclude in your life, because there's so many times where I'm just to, if it helps, I will try to speak for, I'll try to tell part of my own story, or just something that I've struggled with, right? Where you're looking around, you're like, I got to have this car, I got to have this house, this, that, whatever. I got to impress these people. And then you talk to like one of those people or many of those people, and they're like, wait, who are you? I've never even seen you before. Like, you don't even, and not in a negative way, as in like you're a nobody. It's more, oh, you're preoccupied with all of our opinions, but we're not even looking at you. It's something of the spotlight effect. So in psychology, that's the idea that we think everybody is looking at us all the time. In reality, everybody has their own problems and is messed up to a degree. Now, of course, if you ran naked down the sidewalk, people would be looking at you for sure. However, if you're minding your business and kind of doing your own thing relatively quietly, obscurely, whatever, most people are not going to think twice about it, and look at me or you or whatever. And so where I'm going with that is basically saying, like, what would make you feel as though you are enough? And I do want to pose the question, but the thing that I come back to is like, are you looking to fulfill this need of feeling as though you are enough through the wrong ends? Are you trying to say, if I am financially successful enough, if I am successful enough with a business endeavor, I will feel as though I'm enough, when in reality, maybe what you are looking for is self acceptance, and maybe a partner, right? Maybe you want somebody to be there for you, to love and support you. I don't know. Let me stop and pose the question there.
Yeah. So that's a question I've been asking myself for a while, right? Because I like to reflect a lot. I have, I consider to have like a decent level of self awareness and trying to understand why I'm feeling these things. And it's not that I'm looking to have, the fanciest car or the biggest house. I feel that even when I got into running a couple of years ago, right? Mostly as a coping mechanism from my depression. And then I started running all these half marathons and then I trained for a marathon. And I felt that accomplishing these goals for myself to feel, I realized that when I reached these goals, I wasn't bragging about it. I wasn't looking for people to give me, to either validate me or to give me all these accolades. I was trying to have these bragging rights for myself, realizing, oh, I was able to do it. But once I finished that marathon, I felt like, okay, I want to run it faster. I want to do more. And it's that ongoing thing, which part of me, I feel that anything that you have in life, you can see both from a positive and negative standpoint. From a negative standpoint, it's a torment. You always feel that you need to push harder and it's never enough. On the positive side, it drives you. It drives you to accomplish maybe more things. Now, what is the root? Maybe the fact that I never felt that I fit in anywhere when I was growing up, perhaps, and I was kind of like an oddball. I wasn't awkward, but I never identified myself with any of those groups. So probably that's the thing, and I'm sure there's many people out there who suffer the same thing, and they're trying to fill that void without understanding or without knowing exactly what is going to fill it up.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I think in the field of psychology, there is a proclivity or a desire to go back to childhood and say, oh, everything is trauma, this, that, whatever. I, I've read a decent amount of stuff. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I do think there are certainly some horrible things that happen to people in childhood, or just right, you didn't fit in as a child, and so the map you drew of the world revolved around being accepted, being loved, and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like, we all want to be accepted and loved, right? And so my maybe I think I think you're a very smart person. You are, as you said, you're self-aware. You're thinking about this stuff. And this stuff is challenging, right? But I guess maybe a follow-on question would be for you, right? So you're doing the marathons and you want to run faster, and you're kind of like, oh, it feels like this incessant thing, right? I applaud you for taking on those challenges. And as you said, pros and cons, right? The pro is you are healthy, you're active, you have goals, you're pushing yourself. The con is that it feels as though the what you're trying to achieve, maybe, under the surface with the marathons, is not giving you what you were hoping for. And so again, it goes back to that question, like, what are you hoping for? And you know, with the marathons, like, what is the feeling that you're after? And then can you maybe find that feeling through other avenues? I guess a different question might be, and I don't want to get too personal if you don't want, but I'm happy to do it if you do,
I'm
is,
open.
how many like close relationships do you feel as though you have? Would you like more? And what are some of the things you do for fun, right? To be like, no productivity, I'm having a good time. How often do you allow yourself things like that?
So close relationships, which I feel that for me it used to be two, maybe now one and a half. I'm some sort of friends with my ex-wife, which was the biggest, the strongest connection I had even before we started dating. And another one is a decade-long friend. But when you're saying how meaningful or strong connections you have, I feel that I never had enough. It was always hard for me to connect to people and to be, I guess, vulnerable and open when it comes to emotions, and not only sadness, fear, insecurities, but also excitement or joy. And that thing right there I think, it's the main driver in today's male loneliness epidemic. We're lacking those meaningful connections. And yes, I would love to have somebody who I can talk to about problems and issues. But what I feel is hard. I don't mind to be open, just like I'm being open with you. It's like, hey, this is what happened. But a funny story that happened to me last year. I was going out with a friend of mine. We were having some drinks. We were driving in the car, and at that point, my ex-wife and I mean, we were still married, but we didn't live. We were in different houses, anyhow. So he found out through Facebook that she was pregnant from another person, and he asked me, "Hey, I heard about this." So I explained very quickly. I gave him like a rundown. Okay, this is what happened. Fine. We got to the place. We sat down. We have some drinks. Next thing, he asked me, "Hey, how are you feeling?" In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, he's probably asking how I'm feeling emotionally and all this stuff, since he asked me just 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, about this thing is happening in my life. So I start telling in a very factual way, without getting emotional or anything like that. Hey, it's been hard. I've been getting some blows here and there. It's been tough. He stops me literally 20 seconds in and say, "Oh, dude, I meant because you were sick 3 days ago." I mean, now I didn't take it personally because I understand. I've had friends who struggle with these emotions, but that's the point. And funny enough, my two deepest connections are females. With guys, it is hard, and it's not something wrong with them. It's just the way that we are raised, I guess.
Yeah, there's so I'm sorry that you had to go through that, and I would agree with you, right? There's probably nothing wrong with them. It's just that society kind of tells men, suggests to men who they should or shouldn't be emotionally in the workplace, whatever, right? And so I think there is it's not a surprise to say or a breaking news to say that most men like look even me like at time and I don't mean like even me, but I certainly struggle with that too, right? It's like emotions are difficult for men, period. Some people are better at it than others, some people are not, right? And it's like if you have a close bond with that friend, maybe that the piece of him asking how you were feeling, maybe that's not his strong suit, or apparently it's probably not, right? No disrespect to him, but like that's what the story was. So it's we're probably not going to solve. Well, we're not going to solve all this stuff in an hour, but I think these are the right conversations for anybody to have, right? To think about, okay, are you getting your psychological needs met in enough ways, or in strong enough ways? And I could go on a long rant about the different needs that we have, right? But let's just focus on the need to be loved, respected, feel as though you are enough, right? Having that connection with others, that is difficult, and it takes time. I have a group of friends with whom I've been friends since like basically middle school, some of them sooner than that, or earlier than that. And there are still times where it's like you get the guys together, we're just kind of BSing and whatnot, and like it's difficult to have the emotional conversations or whatever. But one thing that I have certainly noticed is with them, as we have gotten older and matured, and a lot of them are married now and having kids, it sort of going through problems together and growing up really forces you to have some emotional acuity, if you will. So it's nice to it's so nice, but to develop those conversations, and also the relationships that foster those emotion based conversations and supportive ones. The I guess the theme that I'm getting at here is like, unfortunately, those things don't come overnight, right? To be like, hey, I met a new friend and we're like so connected on every level and we support each other. And I hope that happens, but let's be realistic. It just doesn't happen overnight. And so, sort of, and I'm happy to keep going as long as you want, but one of the things, right, is like why I feel therapy can be so important is like, look, we certainly need real, legitimate relationships, whether it's friends, family members, parents, cousins. We need those relationships to be able to give us some of that love and support and all that. However, like that can be hard to find. And also, like, if I'm going through a hard time, somebody else is going through a hard time, right? I'm not going to like call my friend every hour of every day, right? That's a little bit much, right? So therapy can be a nice outlet where and I think you had said that
Yeah,
you were trying therapy.
yeah,
Yeah, right. Just for the listeners, right? It can be a nice outlet where it's like, sure, you are paying this person, but they are trained and they're pretty good at this, right? To be able to get in the office and overnight, right, or however long it takes you to get into their practice, have a conversation and go deep like this. And that can be a nice start, right? Because for a lot of people that show up at the psychiatrist's office, they have spent so many years pushing all this stuff down, and then all of a sudden it's like they've done, and I'm not casting any judgment, this is just how it goes, right? Is they show up having done zero work on the problems and the emotions and all that, and it just pours out, and it ends up being a lot of the times the beginning of the process, of the healing process, right? So you develop that relationship with your therapist, you develop that connection, all of a sudden you start thinking about things in a different fashion, and then you become a different person on that therapy journey, right? And then you, by doing that, you hopefully develop a capacity to have similar kinds of conversations with your loved ones, right? You open up enough to allow them to support you. And so that's kind of my rant there, but it's certainly a really important thing. We can definitely shift back over towards your own situation, but I feel like that's a nice little plug for folks who are listening.
yeah. And I totally agree with you. These deep connections and friendships don't happen overnight. And I think post COVID, it got worse. I think people just they isolated themselves. And I mean, I was one of them, but at that point, I was in a relationship. And one thing I realized when I was going through this period, this deep, deep depression, I've experienced depression before, but this was the deepest one. That anytime I was meeting friends who I used to work out with, I was just wearing a facade completely. None of them knew, and that's on me probably, but none of them knew what I was going through. I put myself in their shoes, and if I was going to look at myself, I said, okay, this guy's is perfectly fine. He might not be happy, but it's not struggling. Inside, I was really, really in hell. And at that point, I realized, bro, we have no idea what people are going through. Everyone is out there just wearing this, facade, this fake image that everything is okay because we are afraid of being open and being a baggage to someone else. Like, well, people are dealing with their own problems. They don't need to hear my problems. And if enough people do that, then you have everyone being miserable, going through all this without relying on connection, especially men. Women are better at this. Women have their girlfriends and they're more vocal and more vulnerable, but we men, we struggle a ton with this.
Yeah, we definitely do. And, again, like when you say the word, like I went through hell, like that evokes something in me that I'm just like, dude, I'm sorry you had to go through that. That sucks. And I would certainly say, right, all of this stuff is difficult. I don't sugarcoat any of it. I don't gloss it up or anything like that. It's hard. It's very hard. I think that one of the things to think about, right, have the listener think about is in these situations, and I'm, again, not casting judgment and not looking down on anyone. I'm just saying that these things are two-way streets, right? In the sense that if like I'll use myself as an example. If I am struggling super hard with depression and I don't tell somebody about it and I don't talk about it, look, again, it's really hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am making some decision to withhold that information, right? And so the two-way street is, sure, you may have friends who are so attuned to people's emotions that they can pull it out of you, but very few people are that good at that sort of thing. And so you may have really loving friends, right? But if they might just be going about their day being like, Daniel, yeah, he is doing great. Look at him. He's got a smile on his face. We're at the gym. Same thing with me, right? If I don't open up to them and say, look, I know I look like I'm doing well, but I'm not, how am I supposed to expect them to find it and help me? And again, this is not an indictment on anyone because I have done this very thing many times. I'm just saying that if I think about my own situation, I'm like, when you start getting help is when you start admitting it to yourself and then admitting it to other people. And there are a lot of people that, it's kind of one of those things where you start to find out people's true colors, right? When you are struggling and you start telling people, obviously, some people are busy and that's okay, right? But those who are willing to help, you will find out who those people are and you'll be like, those are my true champions, my true advocates. And then that's where those really supportive relationships come from. Not that they can't come from out of nowhere, but it's like, how do you expect to have a deep, serious, supportive relationship if you haven't been through challenges together, right? And those challenges, kind of working through them, is predicated on being able to admit that you're struggling with them in the first place and then finding solutions together.
Yeah, we're shooting ourselves in the foot basically by not being able to being vulnerable, as you said. And again, I know it's hard, and I know that many people have struggled with this. And I remember when I was going through those times, the only thing I was thinking is like, man, if I'm feeling this way, and I feel that my life pretty much outside what I was going through was fine. I mean, I wasn't homeless, I wasn't struggling financially or anything like that. I start getting concerned or yeah, worry about all those other people that don't even have that. And I went into this deep rabbit hole of trying to research about anxiety and depression among men, the suicide rate. And I found out like an insane number that at least in 2021, I think it was around 12.3 million adults seriously thought about suicide, and 1.7 of them actually attempted. So when you see this, it is terrifying because what I'm trying, I guess, what I was trying to, or my goal with this episode and talking to you and talking to other people in the future is, how do we do to help people who are truly struggling to start opening themselves up and finding a way to maybe not eliminate the pain, but to slowly start healing without pushing them too hard. Because again, nobody is going to react or nobody's going to act upon, okay, you need to do this, right? It has to come from themselves. But when you're such in deep hole, it's hard for you to crawl yourself back out of it.
Yeah, it is so hard. And I just want to keep coming back to that because you bring up such a good point, right? I'll talk to some people, even if it's on a podcast, and I'll put forth some of my ideas related to depression, right? And they'll say, well, Brian, like, you're talking about getting somebody on an exercise plan. This person is so depressed they can't get out of bed, right? That's a hard question to answer. I don't totally know. I guess if I boil it all the way down, right? I think the best things are probably baby steps, right? So if you can't get out of bed, set a goal for yourself to be like, whatever it may be, I'm going to get out of bed for 6 hours today. Yesterday I was in bed all day. I'm going to get out for 4. Whatever that number is, whatever that goal is that feels approachable to you, you want to try to get some small wins, right? And again, I'm not using the word small as a judgment thing. It's make it so that you could actually achieve that. And then also try to string those wins along and together such that you can look back a week later, a month later, and say to yourself, I have this body of evidence that shows that I've won a lot of small battles. And now I have a little bit of momentum for myself and I feel a little bit better. Let's keep this thing going. Again, it's so hard. Like I'm right there with everybody who has experienced this and has struggled with it, because it's, if you're in that pit, oh my goodness, it's almost like nothing can bring you out. But again, it's focusing on the, as cliche as it sounds, like one foot in front of the other and getting sort of that flywheel of emotion going. I'm not glamorizing it, right? The flywheel as in you're ticking one little tick on the wheel by getting out of bed. The next day, another little tick. And maybe it takes a week, maybe it takes a month, maybe it takes 6 months. You get that thing going a little bit faster and faster. Sure, there will be days where it stops moving, where you lose your progress, but you get back on the wagon and you try to pick up more of those small wins. I think the other piece here is, and I'll be as raw as I can in this, right? When I have experienced depression in the past, there are times where, you really question whether or not, and I have questioned whether or not I want to be alive. And that is such a, oh, it's such a tough and dark place to be, right? However, when I really think about it and I say, what is really going on here? Do I really want to be dead? Most of the time, the answer for me is that I don't. It's just that I'm in so much pain right now. My brain is trying to trick me into thinking that being dead is actually an escape or a solution to the pain, right? And it's wild because there are, I think the last few years for myself have been pretty good on the mental health front. And I look back on good days at those depressive episodes, those depressive days. And I say to myself, like, it's so utterly obvious now that, like, I didn't want to be dead whatsoever. I was just in colossal amounts of pain and I didn't have any idea how to get out of it. And I also sort of believed that I couldn't get out of it, right? And so much of it is reminding yourself, like, what is it that uh, I know, again, I'm not trying to simplify this at all, but it's like, what do you live for? What could you not go without, right? If you thought about your family or a couple of your friends, or the simple act of getting up and going to the coffee shop in your neighborhood that you love, like, don't you want to do that? Like, again, not trying to be accusatory, but like, think about those things and try reconnecting to that good energy in your life. And eventually that flywheel gets going. I promise you, it absolutely does. It takes time, but I promise you, it eventually gets going. And then at some point, you will be able to look back and you'll be able to say, I have this good emotion back on my side. I have this good energy on my side. I like to be alive. I feel alive. I feel good, but it's a harrowing process. And I don't want to gloss over that.
Yeah, I'm very much I very much agree with you when it comes to the small wings. And I don't know if people see it as, well, this is kind of embarrassing. It might feel embarrassing even if that small win could be just brushing your teeth that morning or shower that day. It's just something that prove to you that you can prove to yourself that you can actually get things done. And when it comes to these things of people toying with the idea of maybe, ending their lives, it's funny because when I was growing up, the only thing I heard all my life was those who commit suicide are cowards, are cowards, are cowards. That's what I heard in my life. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Once you experience the pain, right, and you're just like, man, I get it. It's not that I'm coward. It's like there's nothing that you can take to heal or to reduce the emotional pain. Physical pain, you have so many pills and drugs and shit. But when it comes to emotional pain, there's nothing. I mean, only time can heal that. And when it's over time, when it's like day after day, month after month, you say, bro, I'm exhausted. I'm literally tired of, and again, I don't know how I made it this far. I'm in a much better place than I was a couple of years ago. And luckily for me, and this just, I guess I'm blessed in that regard because I never intended to be this way. I never allow myself to be a full day in bed. I never allow myself to go out and getting blackout drunk. To me, my coping mechanism has always been working out and work. Good things, but not many people have that luck of using those as a coping mechanism. So I totally get it. And yeah, as you said, when you're in so much pain, it's not that you're trying to find a solution. You just want to stop feeling to some degree.
Yeah. And the thing that you mentioned about, hearing as a kid, right, that somebody that takes their own life is a coward or is selfish. Sure, I'm sure there is one person in the world for whom that description fits. But like you said, when you have been through absolute despair, whether it's, for some reason or it's not, right? Maybe it's just your brain acting the wrong way, having a disorder or whatever. When you've been through that pain, like, I hear those stories now, the only thing that comes to mind is I want to cry, because it makes me feel like, oh my God, that person was in even more pain than I have ever been in before. And I feel as though I have been in colossal amounts of pain emotionally, where again, the thought crosses my mind to be like, it has in the past, right? To be like, do I want to live here anymore? To think about somebody going through that, like, it's heartbreaking, man. That's all it is, you know? And again, I'm sure there's people who have gotten caught up in drugs or, you know, committed crimes and they're like, well, I don't have to go to jail. I'll kill myself, you know? But, the people who were struggling or were struggling in silence or whatever, you know, the majority, the 99.9% of people, man, that it's so heartbreaking. And that's the only way to put it.
What have you found to be, I'm not going to say the main cause of depression because everyone has a different thing. I feel that in my case was mostly hopelessness. Hopelessness felt like, okay, there's nothing that I can do to either fix my life or fix this or fix that. But in your research to write, when writing your new book, what have you found either causes of depression or techniques that people can use to, I'm going to say, completely get out of it, but slowly trying to get better, I guess.
Yeah, so there's so much to uncover there, and we probably won't have time to do it all, but I'll give you the synopsis, right? So, a lot of researchers will say that depression is a complex disease, and they look at depression through this framework called the biopsychosocial model. And so that is an amalgamation of a few different words. So if you break it down, you say bio is biological, psycho is psychological, social is just social. Those are three different, really broad categories um, of different conditions that can come about or uh, situations, stressors, whatever you want to call them, that can come about in your life that can lead to depression. And I guess, you know, there's two ways to look at that. One is depression is really complex, so there's a lot of different factors that go into it. The other is we have not been able to pinpoint a specific mechanism in the brain or specific stimulus that causes depression. So we look around and we say there are biological factors, there are social factors, there are psychological factors, that sort of thing. So the overall approach that I take in the book is a holistic one. I open the book by talking about this biopsychosocial model and basically setting the stage for the content that comes next, which is, or the rest of the book, which is basically to say, we're going to look at biological factors of depression. We're going to look at psychological ones. We're going to look at social ones. If I gave something a little bit more concrete in regards to applying that framework in the book in general, right? You might be able to say, like, if I was talking to somebody, I might be able to pull out of them that, for example, like, on the biological front, they don't exercise a lot. Maybe they're a little bit overweight. Their body is just off kilter, let's say, right? And so maybe that leads to certain things in the brain, neurotransmitter activity, chemical imbalances, you name it. Psychologically speaking, right? I want to look at that person and say, okay, how is your mind structured? What are the beliefs that you hold? What are the thoughts that you have? Are you constantly holding on to beliefs that are dark? Are you thinking negative, pervasive, dark thoughts all the time? All of the things that I just mentioned can be precursors or inputs to depression, right? And then on the social side, it's sort of a bucket for everything else. So it's your relationships, your job, where you live, how you fit into your community. Do you have social status? All of those things. So if I were working with somebody, you know, in the role of a coach, I would be trying to pull those things out of them and say, okay, are there biological factors here, psychological, social, so on and so forth, and then we go and try to rebuild those different pillars of our lives. The last thing that I want to say, you know, in this preamble about the book is, so you had said, you know, your depression was caused by hopelessness, right? And that, like, I'm right there with you. I think that's an appropriate way to put it. In the book, I say that depression basically is hopelessness. It's hopelessness and helplessness, right? So you combine those two feelings and you look around and you say, okay, let's think about the biopsychosocial model. I'm overweight. I don't like how I look. I don't like my body. I feel terrible all the time. I believe all these negative things. The world's an awful place. It's never going to change. My friends, I don't have any friends. I don't like my job, so on and so forth. The undertones of all of that thinking, right, is helplessness and hopelessness. You say those things, I am hopeless right now because I don't see a way that things are going to get better, and they are bleak right now. And then the hopeless piece sorry, the helpless piece is I have no idea what I'm going to do to change those things. In fact, maybe I think that I can't change them. And that is your recipe for depression. Once you start to find a little bit of agency, right? It's that same thing I was talking about with the flywheel. Once you have a little bit of agency to be like, ooh, I can change this thing in my life, I can change that thing in my life, all of a sudden the momentum gets going again. And that hopelessness and that helplessness begin to retreat a little bit. And that gives you a window that you can maybe jump through, right? To start making changes in those three spheres, the biological, psychological, and social parts of your life. And that is, in a nutshell, that is at a very, very high level, right? That is how depression can be managed and possibly even overcome.
Yeah. Um, to me, when you were explaining this whole thing, I understood. See, we need to, I guess, even though I was aware, I needed a reminder that in many cases, we have no control over it. It's just like a chemical imbalances in our brain. And that's, I guess, the first part, or the first two, and the third one would be more like, okay, I'm struggling all this in my life. And yeah, man, I feel, man, it's just, to me, I feel that if people understand themselves better, and they do the work, and hopefully people that either you coach or read your book can take something out of it. And just by understand, I feel that once you understand yourself, you're halfway there. Because that is a massive thing, because now you know exactly what you need to do next. How easy or hard that would be, that's a different story. But but knowing where you are at that point is massive. And again, I really appreciate you taking the time to write these books, because I feel that coming from somebody like you, who is not a psychologist, who's not a therapist, who's just another guy who struggle just like many of us, people can relate to you. People can relate to, you know what, I feel the same. And maybe the tips, or some of the hacks, or some of the toolkit they use might not work for everyone, but people can adapt to their own life, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you put it very well. That is the overall goal and approach that I have. This stuff is not easy. Not everything works for everybody. Life is hard. The figuring out who you are, where you want to go in the world is very difficult. Our minds shield us from a lot of that information. But like you said, starting to figure out who you are is probably half the battle, maybe more, I don't know. And yeah, my mission is to just equip people with these tools in hopes that it gets them somewhere good. Because, we talked about those emotions, right? Of specifically depression, being in that pervasive state of despair, being in absolute agony and anguish. You go through that and it literally changes you. It changes who you are on a fundamental level, and you can't look at this stuff the same anymore. And so I write these books keeping those emotions in mind and saying, if I can bring one person out of that, if I can bring two people out of that, oh my goodness, that means the world.
Yeah, and it makes you more empathetic, and it puts you in a perfect place to help other people that have gone through that. I feel that if you want to help somebody else, a friend of yours, or if you want to be empathetic, I don't want to say that you need to go through something similar to truly understand what another person could go through. Because again, it's like me trying to relate of what women feel under period. I'll never be able to relate. I'll never be able to understand that, because I will never go through that. But if you have gone through some level of emotional pain, and you got out on the other side and you're fine now, you become way more empathetic, and you can help that person who doesn't want to open or doesn't know how to open. And I will encourage anybody who has a friend, and just try to open them up, just and see where that takes you. At the end of the day, you just need to have empathy, and and to be there. Don't try to solve any issues, just try to be somebody who can listen, I guess.
Couldn't agree with you more. People struggle. We all do. Again, life is hard. People go through tough things. And sometimes, they and we just need to be listened and heard and loved. And, to be honest, that's probably what most of us are after anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Ryan, really, really enjoy our conversation. I do have like a closing question for you, which is, if there was one singular idea that had the most profound, impact on your life, what would it be? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Follow up question: is this mental health or just anything?
Anything, anything.
Anything. Because the larger scope is not coming to mind right now, I guess I would say something in the middle of like the power of thoughts, right? And one, understanding that thoughts are powerful and can generate and evoke emotions in you, but also that they are just thoughts, right? And there's almost this trap that you can fall into sometimes where you if you believe in your thoughts, then they become really scary, right? And you say, well, what if some thought that I don't want pops into my head? Then I have to actually consider it and give weight to it, right? And maybe it's telling me something about myself, about life, about the world, whatever. When you give yourself permission to say, look, maybe I'm not 100% in control of my thoughts, but I can direct most of them or a good amount of them. And also the ones that pop into my head randomly, seemingly randomly, they're not my control. They're not my fault. They're also not my responsibility. And being able to make that distinction and say, look, if I have a negative thought and it makes me feel a little bit lousy for a little bit, that's okay. What I have to do is I have to focus on the things that make me feel better. And also, right, if you are thinking about negative things, that doesn't necessarily mean, law of attraction style, that hellfire and brimstone is coming to your door, and all these, the plague and all that, right? So remembering that thoughts are just things, at the same time, they are powerful. So we want to leverage them in a way that serves us. And, how that impacted my life was being a kid with anxiety. I would always say to myself, okay, and I think I learned this through various books and, different audio programs and cassettes and whatnot that I had listened to and read as a kid and whatnot, was the idea that like you have to make, if you want something to happen in your life, you have to make it manifest on the inside with your thoughts first, right? You have to create it in your mind, then it'll come to fruition in the world. I hate to say it. Maybe it works for some people, but it doesn't work for me. And the thing that I struggled with there was I felt like if I couldn't see myself doing the things that I wanted, those things would never come to fruition. And so I found myself being anxious already and saying, okay, well, I just got to think about, let's say I'm going to a job interview. I got to think about myself succeeding in that job interview, getting the job offer, then I'll get it. In reality, I would struggle to conjure up those scenarios in my mind. I'd feel terrible. And then I'd feel even more terrible when I said to myself, because I can't conjure up those thoughts, I'm doomed to fail, right? And so again, it's the power of thoughts and the permission that you give yourself, or that you should give yourself, to say, look, I don't have to conjure up these images in my mind. What's going to happen is going to happen. And I'm not saying in a fate way, just in a way of you have agency. You get in that situation and you can make things happen, even if you thought negatively before it or positively, right? So use your thoughts in a way that impact you positively, and don't get so down. And I'm saying this to myself as well, when those thoughts are negative. That really did change my life, because it allowed me to say, look, I'm anxious, and my default is to want to jump into my head and see myself not being anxious in this scenario that I'm about to go to, that I'm anxious about. I gave myself permission to say, I don't need to do that. And then all of a sudden it was like, wow, I don't need to experience so much anxiety as I thought I did. That really, really helped me.
Don't believe everything you think, challenge everything. Yeah, I cannot agree more with you. That is something that is being very helpful for me in the last 2 years or even 4 years, I think, where anytime you have a negative thought, challenge it, right? It's not, it doesn't necessarily have to be real. Every now and then they might be real, but most of the time they're not. And the part of what you say, like imagine this best scenario, how you succeed. I can actually see myself doing it, but then that creates high expectations. Then I fall flat, and then I come to the all these stories we tell ourselves, like, "Oh, I'm not good enough," whatever. It was just high expectations to begin with. So I could not agree more with you. Where it works for some people, it might not work for other ones. But one thing is for sure: just don't believe everything you think, because at the end of the day, most of that thing is just BS anyway. So, Brian, once again, I really, really enjoyed the conversation, and I felt that I had so many other topics when it comes to anxiety to talk about, but then it would be for a different time. I did buy yesterday your first book. Now I need to find the other one because I'm very interested to know about depression as well. But where can people find you if they want to either work with you or just buy your books and get all this information for themselves?
Yeah, best place, like kind of a hub, if you
Mhm.
will, is my website. So that's getoutofyourhead.com. It's all one word. There's no dashes, spaces, or anything like that. So that's got the blogs, the books, coaching, and all that.
Perfect. Yes. Once again, Brian, I really appreciate the work that you've been doing, and I hope that many people benefit from it. I'm sure that they're going to be, but again, as I mentioned, this is a huge, huge issue in today's society, and I feel that it is not being talked about nearly enough.
I could not agree more. And I appreciate you having this conversation with me, playing full out, if you will, and really talking about some heavy hitting subjects that, don't come up in every podcast episode. So I hope people get a lot out of it. And I give you credit, man. Like you said, you're self aware, you're smart, you care a lot. That comes through. Like, I think you're on the right path. I'm not saying that this stuff is easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I give you credit for walking the path.
Appreciate it, man. And once again, thanks for coming on the podcast. And yeah, hopefully, uh, tons of people will learn from it.
That sounds great.